Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Finding Me on the ITV networks. Shafinaaz Hassim has written in the book Sophia, always check your inner state with the Lord of your heart. Copper isn't copper. Copper doesn't know it's copper until it's changing to gold. Your loving doesn't know majesty until it knows its helplessness. And with that, I would like to introduce my very special guest today, and I'm sure you must have guessed that it is Shafinaaz Hassim, the author of the book Sophia. Shafinaaz is a South African author, a poet and a sociologist, and her works include Daughters Are Diamonds, Honor, Shame and Seclusion, a South African perspective. She has also written in 2009 Memoirs for Kenya, and very recently launched the book Sophia. She has completed her Master of Arts in Social Science at the University of Witwatersrand, and she has lectured in undergrad and postgrad courses in post-structural feminism, both at UKZN and at Wits. She is also the editor of Belly of Fire, an anthology, and what we're going to speak about today is more or less to cover the essences of most of the discussions in these books, but I would like to focus a lot more on Sophia because I think it is very relevant to the current context and of course to the challenges that Muslim women face, but not only Muslim women, women in all social strata, in all levels of the social strata, in all social contexts. So with that, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for joining me, Shafinaaz.
Wa alaikum salam, Quraysha, and thank you for having me on your show.
Okay, I'm very excited about this book and the discussion, but we'll come to it gradually and in stages. My first question to you is, and I think everybody out there would really like to know, is why did you choose the social sciences as your degree?
I think that, I started off studying architecture when I first left school. Very much the creative soul, the idea of reflection has stood with me as a child, whether I was writing in diaries or making notes or sketching and doodling. And architecture just, it brought the sciences and the creativity together. And then I went across into the arts, and I was like a kid in a candy store, literally. African literature, English, sociology, psychology. And I haven't looked back since. I think I found my space in the arts faculty. So,
of course, then the passion was nurtured through all these creative forums that you found.
Well, absolutely. I think very much more about the process through life is very reflective. So we want to be able to ask questions, find those answers, and the social sciences provides that platform in so many ways.
I like what you just said. You said that the process through life is reflective, and basically this particular program is called Finding Me, and it's all about developing your identity, and developing your identity, even finding yourself, is then a reflective process, and so that's exactly what you actually embarked on in this journey. But my second question to you then is, you are an author and a poet as well. So did this passion stem from studying in the social sciences, or were you always passionate about language as a creative means?
I've been writing and keeping a diary since I was maybe 10 or 12 years old. And obviously this develops over time as you grow. Your writings change over time. But the poetry really came about while I was researching Daughters Are Diamonds for my master's thesis. I was interviewing women in a very biographical sense, particularly Indian Muslim women in South Africa, because that's where my interest lied. And some of the material was so daunting that I needed to find an outlet, a creative outlet, and I would write online in a blog called Memoirs for Kenya. I wrote poetry, very much a tribute, and obviously you have the book that's come off that.
But that's amazing, and you said the writing was daunting. Why was it daunting? Did you find that the real life conversations that you were having were very intense? Did you realize that things were happening that you didn't know about, and you were discovering new issues? What made it difficult for you?
I think suddenly when you take on the focus of biography, you step over the threshold of glorified presentations of people's lives. Suddenly it's not about how beautiful my house is or the beautiful car that I drive. It's really about what I experience behind the veil, behind that scene. When you cross the threshold of the house, how much of autonomous decision making is allowed? And the stories that we heard growing up from the Sunnah, from the stories of the Prophets, provided for us, a very important focus that we're not able to live. So now we go back to looking at our notions of masculinity and femininity, taking from then and looking at now, and it's wholly different.
Okay, so while you're there, you lectured on post-structuralist feminism, if I'm correct. What is that? And explain to us what are the kind of theses or theories or developments in the argument that you actually put forward.
Well, using Daughters Are Diamonds as case study, I was really asked to present what a lot of the sociology departments require at undergrad level is classical theories and contemporary theories. And so as a theorist, I identify as an identity theorist. You're building up on the classical theorists, moving up towards theories that contemporary feminists are writing about. But we're also engaging a new form of feminism, which is very much related to being Muslim, living in a contemporary Western world, and the sort of amalgamation of identity.
Right.
And what does that mean? I'm Muslim, I'm South African, I'm a woman, I'm a professional, I'm a lecturer, I'm a writer. All of these suddenly come together in making who I am. But I don't want to necessarily be reading Judith Butler, which I do, or Asma Balis, or Amina Wadud. I want to be able to construe those dynamics within the space that I am in contemporary South Africa. The dynamism is so huge, and so amazing. And the only way to do that was to bring the biographies from Daughters Are Diamonds, which are very local, and to bring these readings together and say to students, this is your challenge. Now you write your story. Now you make sense of this reality, this understanding that is you.
Okay, so the concept of feminist is always considered something of a taboo, or maybe like, I don't want to be a feminist, or yes, I am. How do you reconcile this particular definition with an Islamic understanding of who a woman is?
It's important for us to be able to look back and forth. So while post-structuralist means we're actually moving beyond structure, beyond what we construe feminism to be, for example, we're not talking of the typical 50s kind of feminism. We're talking of new ways of forming feminism that make sense to us. And even if you don't take on a label such as feminism, you don't have to call yourself a feminist to understand egalitarian ways of living between men and women. But it's important as Muslims to look back to the Sunnah, to look back at how masculinity and femininity was constructed within protective moral spaces. But you had Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who was married to a woman who was older than him, who was a very established businesswoman, and who had been married before. And you look at all of these things and say, well, here was somebody who was not intimidated by these values, nor was society intimidated by these particular values that she held. What has changed?
Yes.
What has changed, and why are we not able to bridge those gaps? Why do we hold these barriers, hold on to these barriers?
Yes.
So one quick example would be, so a woman is in the professional space in modern day South Africa. She's a Muslim woman. She has expectations on her as a mother, a wife, a daughter-in-law, a daughter, but she's perhaps in the legal profession, in the medical profession, or any other. As soon as she steps across the threshold of her home, those decision-making skills are nullified.
Yes.
How her children's lives are administered requires some kind of hierarchy of answers, and why?
Yes, of course. And
why is that collaboration not taken into consideration?
And all of these feature into then understanding what is your role as a woman, not specifically to challenge that of a man, but to understand yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, now I have to stop you there. We're going for a break. When we come back, we'll take the discussion a little further. So we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me. With me today in the studio is my very special guest, Shafinaaz Hassim, the author of the book Sophia. And before we went into the break, we were discussing the understanding of feminism and, of course, how that is applicable then today in your understanding or in our understanding as Muslim women. And Shafinaaz, you was, before we went into the break, you spoke to me about feminism and said that it helped you to identify your various roles. I just want to be clear on something as well. Is feminism then, as you understand it today, a concept that is not anti-men, but more about establishing your perhaps your psyche or your understanding or your ability as a woman exactly as how Allah or God has intended for you to be?
I think it's important to say that as these conceptualizations have changed over the years, we're really breaking away with a very patriarchal definition of what feminism is. It's not this sort of hardcore fight against, women against men. It's never meant to be that. It is about creating an egalitarian society so that adults of both genders might come together and create a better citizenship ahead of them. The responsibility of bringing up children is on both. And so it's really about leveling the playing field in a way and bringing together the kind of roles that might work together for that.
So that it was necessary to perhaps begin with this concept, to evolve around it because of the fact that women were facing many challenges, isn't it?
I think especially so that, we talk about the evolution. The idea that, yes, we are re-identifying where we are and how we make sense of identity. And feminism or the postmodern feminist is really working that into how you make sense of identity.
Okay, so understanding that now, I want to come to 2009, where you published the Memoirs of Kimia. A very interesting name and something different. Can you tell us what was the Memoirs of Kimia about?
Well, like I said, I wrote poetry in a blog, very much linked, but a more creative sort of aspect of my research. And Kimia is the adopted daughter of Jalaluddin Rumi, a 13th century Persian poet. And I began to identify with Mevlana Rumi's writings from many years now. And I realized also after reading Kimia's biography how we might take from that sense of spirituality that she encounters in a very short lifespan. So I decided to name the blog Memoirs for Kimia, and subsequently 4 years later, in 2009, I published some of the collection in a book called Memoirs for Kimia.
Okay, what was inspirational about her biography that really touched you?
She lives a very short life. Rumi actually finds her when she's 9 years old and discovers in her a thirst for knowledge. So he takes her from her parents' home, adopts her, and gives her an education. And she does hifz with him, and she learns fiqh, and she learns poetry. And then she falls in love with Shams Tabriz. But she has this huge passion that's never realized because the companionship between Shams Tabriz and Mevlana Rumi is so spiritual, and so that sometimes they go for days having conversations and she feels left out of it. So it's just this idea that women give to a cause so completely that she dies of heartbreak.
Amazing. It's like a Leila Majnun kind of story, perhaps, I think, in a way.
Perhaps it is.
Yeah, but of course it says a lot more spiritual level.
I think it says a lot about, about women.
Yes, it does.
Spiritual women.
Yes. While you were talking, this image in my mind of Mevlana Rumi, here he is, a male figure, and takes in a female because he recognizes potential that she has, and he teaches them. And I think of the contemporary society that we're in, and oh my God, no, you cannot learn under a man, and a man cannot teach you, and we have all of these negative stereotypes that are then transferred onto women, and of course the relationship between men and women. And I think perhaps in one way is that when we don't recognize each other as equal in intelligence or potential, and we start defining on physical, like on biology, and not on your inner self, that's maybe where we create the shortcomings or we prevent ourselves from developing our potential.
I have to agree with you, and we're looking at the debates in so many spheres, whether it's talking about egalitarian prayer space, the space for conjecture and debate, and yes, the potential of girl and boy children ahead in creating that community, in creating a strength of that community, as we are a minority, but quite a powerful minority. How do we sustain that?
Yes.
By educating our girl and boy children for the future.
You have focused mostly on social issues, I think so, in like Daughters of Diamonds and Sophia again. And before you answer this also, perhaps if you can just briefly mention to the audience what Daughters of Diamonds are about, so that in case anybody who's not read the book can perhaps then go out and get themselves a copy. And then explain to us is that why have you chosen to focus on social issues? Is it because these issues, especially amongst the Indian Muslim community in South Africa, is usually swept under the carpet? Is it left so that people don't talk about it? We just pretend that everything is fine. You tackle each issue in a different way and on different levels in your book. What drove you to this particular scenario?
Well, to begin with, as part of my research and my thesis research for Daughters Are Diamonds, I looked at the South African Indian Muslim community in particular, and taking Indian and Muslim, the conjecture between a cultural reading of Quran and the pure text of Quran from a Muslim perspective, and saying, well, the patriarchal reading comes from various cultures. And while Daughters Are Diamonds focuses on Indian, I mean, obviously the research has gone beyond that in the last 10 years. So it's gone into, whether it's you're looking at the Greek or Portuguese or Zulu or Afrikaans, these very patriarchal traditionalist societies have something in common with them. And so what Daughters Are Diamonds does is it just looks at, we've actually allowed those gaps to happen. And I use what I call a psychological form of honor killings. The idea that women are stigmatized for perceived deviance, not for deviating, for perceived deviance. That she's a symbol of the family honor, and anything she might even construe or do might have an adverse effect on honor. Is it? We talk about is it?
Yeah, because somebody who's in the South African society will say, but there's no honor killings among South African Muslims.
Quite so.
But you're speaking of the psychological.
I'm saying that it's far more insidious if it's psychological, and it kills potential. So we're not actually living the true text of the Quran. We're not actually living and not reading back transparently as per the Sunnah.
So why the social issues or focusing on these kinds of, somebody might say almost negative perspectives?
Well, the social issues come to the fore because we need to identify and go to the root cause if we're able to make a difference. So with Belly of Fire, there's a collection, obviously, of different activists who've written from fiction. And I found, after Daughters Are Diamonds and the engagement, that I wanted to turn to fiction as a vehicle of debate. Sophia is about domestic violence, a very pertinent issue that's been spoken about now, but certainly not a new issue. And so I found, while I was doing the data and research for Daughters Are Diamonds also, that domestic violence needed to be written up about more, so that we could have that debate.
Okay, so now very quickly before we go to the break, seeing that we have now reflected on some of your writings, can you quickly tell me which literary author has inspired you?
Oh, a number. I do enjoy, if it's fiction, I do enjoy Janet Fitch. I don't know if you've heard of White Oleander, you must read it. Poetically, it's Jalaluddin Rumi, Shamset Tabriz, and there's a lovely book called The 40 Rules of Love by Alif Shafak, which I would highly recommend to listen, to the audience. And I could sit for a long time and tell you about books that I love to read. But, those are a good start point.
Good starting points, yes. Okay, so let's go to the break, and when we come back, we'll then take on the value of literary context. So we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the final segment of Finding Me on the ITV networks of episode 1 with Shafinaaz Hassim, the author of Sophia. Before we went on the break, Shafinaaz was explaining to me, or well, rather elaborating on the very many authors who have had a special influence on her life. And Shafinaaz, yes, I know you mentioned Rumi and Tabriz, but is there another poet that has impacted on you, or is there something about their poetry that you would like to share with us? And how did that poetry then impact on you and help you in this reflective process, which you had initially mentioned, that is included in everyone's search for their own identity?
Well, if I look beyond, Coleman Barks' studies of Rumi or Kabir Helminski's studies, I would look beyond to Franz Kafka, because there's some interesting, developments around how you should write, not just reflectively but responsibly and accountably. What change are you creating? A change in consciousness through your writing, and I think that really comes through for me as quite sort of potent
and important.
Yeah.
Okay, but is there any specific lyrical words that you remember from the poetry that plays in your mind as you're thinking, as perhaps maybe when you're reflecting or just relaxing, sometimes when you're taking time out? Is there something that it really gets to you?
It would depend on the time and the space. If I had to think of something in particular, it would be Rumi, who says, "When I touch the ground in prayer, my only purpose is you." And what's important about that is even when you're taking this responsible, active citizen role, you're sort of focused and going ahead in life. But there's a moment when you're meant to just sit still with the little green mat in front of you, and everything else comes to a standstill.
Most certainly.
So,
I want to ask you, seeing that the focus so much today is on literary content and what one reads or reflects on, but these are all words. Do you believe that there is value in words, and is there any value in non-fiction? Because there will be people who tell you don't read non-fiction books.
Yeah. As a sociologist, I can't possibly say that, especially because I've seen the power that bringing biography together can actually, the shifts that it can create. And I don't think that fiction is necessarily non-fiction. It's very sort of ill-defined as such.
Yes.
Because there's some biography, there's something very authentic that's needing to be written into a fictional text as well. You have a contract with the reader, and the reader wants to read this and say, I can identify with this, rather than this is completely unidentifiable. So for me, there's biography of the writer and a sense and a spirit that comes into every form of writing. With nonfiction in particular, it's important to be able to write technically, to be able to make sense of especially social issues that come together. And from there, you can actually take data and put it together into the fictional form.
Okay, there is that saying that words will be words, or words are only words. Do you feel that once it's actually put together in a constructive form, that words actually come to life and tell more?
Words certainly do come to life in so many ways, and especially even, in speech. If you really want to live consciously and in awareness, you've got to think about every word that comes out of your mouth. Because it makes an impact, especially on children listening around you. So you may think, this whole sort of cliche of sticks and stones, words will never hurt me.
Yes.
Sticks and stones may break my bones and words will never hurt me. But actually it's quite significant to make note of the fact that words have an impact. Children listening to them, it leaves an imprint on children. And your actions and your words will actually chart a course for them ahead.
Yeah, and that's why Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Man kana yu'min bil yawmil akhir, falyakul khayran aw liyasmut." That whoever believes in the day of after and the messenger and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, "Man kana yu'min billahi wal yawmil akhir, falyakul khayran aw liyasmut or liyaskut." He said, then just be quiet. You either speak good or otherwise keep quiet. And I think the effect thereof is very apparent if we consider it, because his words are very clear. He's stipulated, speak only good. Not, it might be good, yes, it's possibly it's good, or it's not bad. No, he said, speak only good or keep quiet. And I think that is very important for all of us. And perhaps even speech is the starting point of building relationships.
Absolutely, and of maintaining those relationships, and also of working your way against oppression. You have to be able to speak up against oppression. So if you see something going wrong in your family, in your neighborhood, in society, it's almost a responsibility, a citizen responsibility, to speak up against that in whatever way.
And now, I think before we just end this particular segment, and in episode 2 we were going to focus extensively on Sophia. If you can just tell us perhaps here a little bit about Belly of Fire, an anthology, and The Silence of 100 Tongues. Okay, that was initially Sophia, isn't it?
That was the original title.
Okay, so Belly of Fire, what did that incorporate? And is it similar to your Memoirs of Kimia, or is it different?
Well, Memoirs for Kimia is poetry that relates to the women that I was interviewing. Belly of Fire, I edited the collection. I've got one short story in there called Diary of a First Wife, which makes comment on polygyny and the Muslim Marriages Bill to some degree. Just this idea of lack of transparency around inheritance issues. So you get this insecurity being felt by the children and all of that. And a number of other activists have written stories from KwaZulu-Natal shack burnings to child abuse, female genital mutilation. There's a story of a woman who loses her child, and there's, what comes of that. And so a number of these short stories and poems written in between are very reflective of the kind of work that these activists do. And it's just really about getting a message out there in the form of short stories and fiction and poetry.
So it's in a cultural context, but of course dealing with real life issues. And does it come from their experiences as activists? that they have written these books? These little stories?
It does come from their experiences as people that they've worked with on the ground. I've got people from the Durban Social Forum writing. I've got a story from a young student at Wits University who was born in Israel and brought up in Johannesburg. And he talks about the displacement issues felt locally, and this sort of concept of aliyah and young people not wanting to actually take on to that. And I've got another story of xenophobia by a Western Cape doctor, experienced, the xenophobia experienced by his patients. So it's also cross-cultural. And dealing with very South African issues.
And I think almost everybody can identify with that, because it's something that we are all living. If you're living in an interactive environment, then it's something you certainly, or everybody can identify with.
Very much so, and also that these stories are able to bridge those perceived gaps that we might experience, give you a window into our lives or each other's lives. We want to be able to look in and say, oh, but we're very much the same actually.
Okay, now I'm going to stop you there because we're going to end, and certainly we're going to come back in the next episode with a window into another more difficult life, and that is the life that Shafinaaz portrays through the book Sophia, which looks at domestic violence. And I think before we end, I would like to leave you with a saying. It says, when you hurt the one you love, you are bound to hurt yourself. And we're going to raise that issue in Sophia. So until next week, fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
1 month or 2? 5. Certainly, darling.
Look what you did.
What?
You spilled.
I'm sorry. It's just a little bit.
Here you go again. Sorry.
What can I do?
You can't do anything because you can't do anything right.
I don't know what to do.
Just shut up.